The Bible is full of stories of individuals who made significant contributions in the history of our faith. People who, sometimes in the midst of tremendous adversity, hung on, sometimes even giving their lives. Hebrews 11 lists a long list of people who, in some respect, is sort of a hall of fame of those saints whose courage and faith was admirable and is noted there. There we see the names of people like Abraham and Moses and Noah and Sarah. Rahab is also mentioned. I think it says something about the heart of God that a prostitute would make that list. These are our forefathers. These are the people that were trailblazers before us. In many ways, we would not be here had it not been for how they lived. And the chapter ends by making this very poetic statement about these people that it outlines and lists there. It says, the world was not worthy of them. So these are those that went before us, and in many ways we stand on their shoulders. But in all of that list of amazing people, there's a phrase in Scripture that's said 2 times about someone that's never said about anybody else, not said about any of those people. It's this phrase: he was a man after God's own heart. David is the only one who is noted by that in Scripture. So today we begin a series on the life of David. We have much to learn from him. I want you to know up front that what we need to be looking for is not information about the history of David's life, but principles, spiritual principles and guides that we can apply to our lives today here in 2021 that are fleshed out and made so apparent for us to learn from David. When we look at his life, we can learn how to better live ours. You may be aware, but more is written about David than any other person in all of the Bible. He is referenced over 1,000 times in Scripture. More is written about David in the Bible. In that respect, for in the Old Testament, there are 66 chapters that say something about David, and his name is mentioned 59 times in the New Testament. He wrote about half of the 150 Psalms. So here's a guy whose life we look at today, and we have the privilege of looking at what Scripture says about him, who is mentioned more than Abraham or Moses or Joseph or Jacob or any other person in all of Scripture. So for that reason alone, he's worthy of our attention. I think if you were to look at the life of David and you were to peel back certain parts of it and not pay attention to other parts, you could kind of get the impression that he was a superhero, that he was superhuman. I mean, he slays Goliath when he's a teenager. He and his mighty men go into battle and slay thousands. He's a king with great wisdom. He expands the geographical stretch of the kingdom of Israel 10 times what it was when he came. But what I love about God in His Scripture is that when we see people like Abraham and Moses and Noah and David, God lets us see for sure the incredible exploits of their faith. And we can aspire to live like that. But what is also true in Scripture is that for every one of them, somewhere along the way, there's something about their humanity that's also penned and put on paper. And I don't know about you, but that gives me hope. Right? We say that because David, as great as he was also very human. There was a season when he made a grave mistake that cost him for some time. But it shouldn't keep us from taking a look at what he did do. The fact that people are human means that the church doors can stay open, right? And so I come to kind of a set of questions when I think about the life of David. I think about this. Why does God choose certain people? Why does He choose certain people in the times in their own lives when He chooses them? David's chosen an anointed king when he's a teenager, but it would be years before he would actually be a king. I'm aware that probably there are in this room today people who are already in their heart what they know they want to be, but it's not yet true in the physical. You already know that you should own a business, but you don't own it yet. You already know you should have a graduate degree, but you don't have it yet. You already know you should be the boss, but right now you're the employee having to take orders from the boss. You know what I'm saying? So it's an important lesson to kind of learn. So what can we learn from David's story that we can apply to our lives? Today I want to take sort of a snapshot and unveil a few things about his life. One of the things that's true is we get a glimpse about how God promotes people. How does somebody, how does David go from being a shepherd to being a king? It's a pretty radical change, right, in his socioeconomic status and where he is in society, where he is in life. So point number one is this: God often promotes from the hidden place. When David was anointed king, there was a ceremony. You may remember the story. The prophet Samuel is the chief prophet in the nation of Israel. He has been having all kinds of problems with the first king. Remember, the children of Israel said to God, we don't want to just do this priest thing. We want a king like all the other nations. We always have to be careful what we ask for unless we just really want it, right? So God finally says, okay, I'll give you a king, and they get to choose a king, and they choose Saul because he looks like a king. He's tall, he's strong, he's handsome, he's intelligent, he's articulate, he's a natural leader. He looks like a king. But you play that out over a few years, and then Saul's in trouble. And he gets in cahoots with a witch, and he goes off down pagan idols, and then he wants to kill David. I mean, we're in trouble by the time we get to the story of David being anointed king. And so Samuel goes before God, and God says, I'm done with Samuel. I'm done with Saul. And this grieves Samuel because he had an affection for Saul. He wanted him to be successful. But God finally says to him, I'm done with him. He's not going to be king anymore. I'm going to give you a new king. And Samuel basically says, okay, if we're going to do that, Saul can't know about it because he'll take my head off. Basically, right? So he goes down to Bethlehem, and God tells him exactly what to do. God always knows who the next leader is that's going to come up that's going to do better than the one before. We should never fret too much about that. And God says, I want you to go to the house of Jesse, and one of his sons is going to be the next king. And you can take a sacrifice, and you can act like you're doing something else. But when you're there, I'm going to show you who the next king is. Now remember our point. God often promotes people from the hidden place. David was already a king in his heart, but he was nowhere near a king in actual life, and nobody knew about him. In fact, had you been David's neighbor, had you lived on the 40 acres next to him and his family, you probably wouldn't have even known his name because he wasn't getting invited to any of the social occasions. He was the one, which was traditional, the youngest son would be out there taking care of the sheep and the goats. So this is David. So Samuel goes, and you may remember the story. This is in 1 Samuel 16. Let me just read it to you, a little clip of it. And it goes like this. In the same way, all seven of Jesse's sons were presented to Samuel. But Samuel said to Jesse, the Lord has not chosen any of these. Okay, so you might ask the question, if all the sons were invited, where was David? They forgot about him. He's just a kid. He's out there doing what kids do. He's taking care of the sheep. He's taking the trash out and mowing the lawn. We don't have to invite him to anything. And there he is, right? And so Samuel was convinced because he knew he had heard the Lord correctly. And so he says, are these all the sons you have? Do you have any more sons? And Jesse says, yeah, there remains yet the youngest. And I love this. But he's out in the fields watching the sheep and goats. And the prophet says, go get him right now. And none of us are going to sit down until he's here. And so they go out there and they fetch. Can I use the word fetch? Is that too country? So they go fetch him, and he bring him back, right? And he comes, and Samuel puts oil over his head, and in a sort of a cloak and dagger sort of way, David is anointed king. And then it's not long after that he goes, again under hidden. He's carrying supplies to his brothers because his dad says go check on him, and then that's when he ends up fighting Goliath because he's already a king in his heart. It's just not clear to anybody else yet. So David is overlooked. He's forgotten. He's marginalized. Who he is minimized by the people around him, and yet God does not forget him. And you may feel like you're in a hidden place today, and I'm just going to tell you right now, God sees you where you are. You are not hidden from his vision. He knows the very thoughts and intents of your heart. He knows your potential. He knows exactly why he put those gifts in your heart. When you were in your mother's womb, he knew you. You are not hidden from him. God sees us. We just got to know that. And you got to know that during those seasons when it's just like, nobody's calling me to go to the party. Everybody else is going downtown to hang out. Nobody called me. Right? I mean, My guy in the cubicle next to me got promoted, but I didn't get promoted. How come she got promoted and I didn't get promoted? And if you're not careful, your heart can be bitter because you got to know who you are and you got to trust that God will promote you when the time comes for you to be promoted. But be careful. What we do with our human heart is exactly what they did with Saul. They promoted him not because of his heart, not because God had said it. They promoted him because he looked like a king. And I don't know how many of you spend time in rooms interviewing people for jobs. I used to do quite a bit of that when I was a teacher. It was always interesting to me to walk out of that room and listen to what everybody else said. And I usually was the one in the room going, I don't think we ought to hire that guy. Let's check his references first, right? Because there was something, it was just sort of that thing, right? And we need people that have radars. So we don't want to promote people based on appearances. Let's remember that God is always interested in the heart first. It was only said of David that he was a man after God's own heart, and it was proven even as a teenager. Promotion that God makes doesn't seem to fit our eye, and it doesn't need to. It needs to fit our heart. It needs to be something that sets us at ease and that we're at peace with it. So if you're in a position where you get to decide who gets promoted, I just say to you, lean on the Lord's wisdom. Look beyond what you see with your eyes. Make sure you see with your heart. So David's overlooked. He's forgotten. He's hidden. They don't even invite him. They invite everybody else, but they don't invite him. And the prophet's like, do you have any other sons? Oh, yeah, there's the. And only descriptor we get of David is that he had a nice appearance. He was handsome. Right? He was ruddy with a fine appearance. Okay, that's all we know about David's physical description. Our culture is tremendously addicted to how things look, how people look. Marketing firms spend a lot of time and money and research making sure the people they put in commercials look like the customers they're trying to attract. We're just sort of hardwired for that anymore. So I want to ask you a question today. Does a degree from Howard Payne University not bear just as much weight as a degree from Harvard? Is it not possible for somebody who graduates from Howard Payne to go to law school and then end up standing in the Supreme Court arguing cases just as much as it is for somebody who graduates from Harvard and has all of the pedigree and billing and connections in high society to also do the same? I know that it's true because I know a man who did exactly that. Came right through Howard Payne, and there's a building with his name on it now at Howard Payne. But we don't see it that way, right? Harvard Payne, we used to call it. On Harvard on the Bayou. But we don't see it that way, right? When somebody looks, you see Harvard degree versus Howard Payne, and naturally we would go after that. But I've had friends that graduate from Howard Payne and that work in high places in government agencies, making ridiculous money, places of influence around all kinds of people. Does a girl from New York City have a better chance in the fashion industry than a girl from Coleman? What does it really... At what point does these kind of things get decided? At what point do we realize that this is not something that we should mess with? There's something very interesting to me in Scripture about how God chooses people and how He calls them out of hidden places, out of complete obscurity, and puts them right in the middle of leading the situation. Gideon's hiding in a wine press, and God says to him, the angel says, you are a mighty man of valor. And he kind of comes up out of the wine press because he's hiding, because he's scared he's going to get killed. And he's like, who, me? I'm from the wrong tribe and from the wrong family. You need to go pick somebody else. Some of you, if God really said to you today what you're destined to do, your first response is, yeah, but do you know what family I'm from? If you met my family, you would understand why I say this every once in a while. I love them, and they might see this on tape, but it's true. So you never know where you come from. I mean, the number one question when I was a freshman in high school, the teachers would read the roll in the new class, and they'd look up and they'd go, are you so-and-so's brother? And so-and-so's brother? Yes. I had 3 older brothers who went before me and blazed a path before me. And I learned vicariously. I learned that, maybe I don't want to go to jail, for example, or have car wrecks because I've been drinking and nearly kill people, for example, all of which was true. So Gideon's found hiding in the wine press. How do you replace Elijah the prophet? Elijah the amazing prophet, right? The miracles that he did, the power that he did, the way he stood in the face of enemies and he overcame all these prophets of Baal. How do you replace him? Well, of course, you go to a farm and you find a guy who's plowing in the field. That's how you replace him. Why don't you go to the temple and find a guy who's versed in Scripture, trained by God? No. You find Elisha because he's working at his daddy's house as a grown man, plowing in the field. And his mantle falls on Elisha. That's where you get the replacement. Many of the disciples are fishermen. Can you imagine Jesus choosing his men? Like, why didn't he go to the temple? Let's find guys who understand the Bible. Let's find guys who know the Scripture. No. Let's find guys that work all night out cussing and who smell like fish. Those are my guys. All right? Those are my guys. A lot of his guys were from that. Jesus himself rises from obscurity. He starts teaching and preaching, begins to get a little bit of a following, and what do they say? Can anything good come from Nazareth? He must be from Coleman or Zephyr or Blanket. Every once in a while, somebody will ask me, where are you from? My hometown is Wills Point. It's about 3,000 people, about like Comanche. You know, when I was there were 2 traffic lights. We have more traffic lights now. But when I was there were 2 traffic lights, and they both started blinking at 10 o'clock at night. Okay? And in the way we all describe where our town is, so people will understand it, we say it's 50 miles east of Dallas. But every once in a while, when I want to be a little bit honorary, somebody'd say, well, where are you from? I say, I'm from Wills Point. They go, I don't know where that is. I'd say, well, it's between Myrtle Springs and Frog. Which is true. Frog. It just says Frog. There's no population underneath. The community of Frog and the community of Myrtle Springs. That's where I'm from. So, how do we do this? And then they even said of Jesus, they said, hang on a minute. How can he be a prophet? How can he be a teacher? He certainly couldn't be the Messiah, because isn't that Joseph and Mary's son? Isn't he a carpenter's son? Because they're looking for somebody that's a Pharisee's son, trained in the law and the Scripture, right? But he doesn't fit any of those. What was he doing all those years? Was he in the temple studying Scripture? I think he went to the temple. We know when he was a child he went to the temple. Okay, that's all we know is just that one instance, right? Didn't you know I'd be about my Father's business? But we assume that the rest of his life he went to the temple on Sabbath, on Saturday. But they said, wait a minute, he's a carpenter's son. How can he be who he is? But I want to tell you something. There are lessons learned in obscurity that you can't teach people when they're in the limelight. There's a value to living in solitude. David learned things as a shepherd out there by himself in the middle of the night when nobody else was around, just him before God, writing his psalms, playing his harp, doing all the things he was doing. We certainly know that to be true, that when he stood up and said, I'm ready to fight the giant. I'll go down there because no man will defy God like this man is defying God. And they're like, don't you want some armor? No. I know what I'm doing. Because when I was a shepherd, living in obscurity, when nobody saw it, I fought the lion and the bear. And the Lord showed me how to overcome them. The lesson translates straight into this situation. I have noticed that some people who are called to lead, they just seem to come out of nowhere. They've spent time alone. They're out of the spotlight. They're shoved to the margins. They're not on anybody's radar. In 2003, when we moved back to Brownwood, Nanda applied to be a history teacher at the alternative school because it was the only job listed in BISD that she had the certification for. History teacher. All of you know she became a principal, right? Well, here's what was funny. She had a master's degree from Stephen F. Faustins long before I met her in 1980. And she did not finish her principal certification that's required by TR. It's some classes you take after you finish the master's. And she didn't even bother to look because she was just going to be a teacher. And a person who became my boss later, who goes to this church, saw on her application to be a history teacher that she had a master's and knew that Stacy Smith at Northwest Elementary was looking for an assistant principal and sent her name over there. Miss Smith called her, and once she saw her heart, and she hired her. And when she got hired, the district could not pay her what she was worth by any stretch. Of course, they don't pay anybody what they're worth, but that's another story. I'm saying none of us get paid what we're worth, is what I'm saying. So they couldn't pay her a principal salary because she didn't have the principal certification. That's how it works in education. You don't have the degree, you don't get the pay, no matter what the experience her job is. And they couldn't even call her a principal the first couple of years. She was called campus facilitator. Fast forward 16 years, and she spends 10 years as the head principal at East Elementary, and her name is the one on a building out in front for everybody driving by and parents to see her name on the sign. Where did she come from? Well, she was applying for a history teacher job because she didn't even know that she would probably be eligible for the other thing, and somebody had to remind her. People come out of obscurity all the time. Listen, valuable lessons are learned in obscurity. If you're living right now where you feel like you're flying below the radar, you're kind of hidden, nobody's really seeing you for who you are, let me tell you what you do. You invest in that season. You study your scripture, you pray, you spend time in solitude asking God to show you in your heart things you will not learn if you're too busy with everything else. Because when you get busy, you won't have time to learn the things you need to learn before you get busy. You hear what I'm saying? When you get promoted. So listen, solitude, here's number 2. Solitude is a good training ground. David must have spent days and days, hours and hours, alone watching the sheep. No company, no conversation. I don't think his internet was hooked up or his phone was working. He was out there with the sheep. Bah! This was what he heard. Fights an occasional lion or bear. This is where he first learned to king it. This is how you develop a king. Stick him out alone in solitude with nobody noticing him and see how he's going to handle his responsibilities doing that. Sometimes deeper things can only be received when a heart is truly quiet and there are no distractions. I love this quote from Chuck Swindoll. Strange as it may seem, those who first accept the silence of obscurity are best qualified to handle the applause of popularity. I don't think you'll handle it well until you really know who you are. You got to be okay with being alone. You got to be okay with the stages and waiting for your day to become and promoted. And that's why David, when he writes all these, like Psalm 62, I wait quietly before the Lord, for my victory comes from him. Psalm 13, instead I've calmed and quieted myself before the Lord like a weaned child. All of that's going on. Being alone with the sheep may not have for us a direct connection with learning how to be a king, but for God and for David, it did. It trained him in scriptures. It trained him in learning to hear the voice of God. It trained him in learning to be content with where he was. He knew how to quiet his soul before God's presence. It trained his heart. And point number 3 is this. God is not looking for perfect people. See, every once in a while, I think people come to church and they're like, well, I don't know if I really belong here. I say this every once in a while, and I'll say it again. I was at I think it was my 25th high school reunion, and we're playing, me and all the guys were playing golf before the dinner that night. And somebody says, well, hey, what do you do these days? And I said, well, I pastor a little church. And one of my buddies that I played high school football with, still keep in touch with, right off the bat, he goes, well, if I ever came to your church, the walls would cave in. And I said, let me tell you something. Let me tell you something right now, Pat. I said, you're exactly the kind of guy I want at my church. The walls wouldn't cave in, because if they did, they would have already fallen in. You don't know the people at my church. Right? Some of you are sitting out there. I know you're all dressed up, but you've been some places. You got some scars. But it's okay. God's not looking for perfect people. And it's great, isn't it, that the Lord tells us all the things that David did. He was a king. He refused to kill Saul. He kills Goliath. He does all these amazing things. And yet we know for sure that he was human and he made mistakes. I love it that God doesn't leave out the humanity of our heroes and skip over it like we shouldn't know about it. We know Peter preached an amazing message at Pentecost and later performed miracles, walked by people and said, get up and walk, and lame people were healed instantly. This is Peter. But this is the same Peter who denied Jesus 3 times. And we know that David wanders for a season, pays a high price, but he's still used by God. God is not looking for perfect people. And I start thinking of these great people. I think of a quote my dad used to say. Some of you your dad or grandparents might have said this. You talk about somebody that's big in the community, got a lot of money, or a popular person or whatever, and he said, that's okay, I'm not worried about him. He has to put his pants on one leg at a time, just like I do. You know that phrase? So every once in a while, I think there's kind of a reminder that God's looking for people who are just like that, who put their pants on one leg at a time, just like everybody else does, and we don't get too full of ourselves. So I hope you'll take these thoughts with you today, that God promotes from the hidden place. Don't let anything ever convince you that He doesn't see you. Every once in a while, He'll give you a little wink. He'll remind you, that He sees you, that He knows who you are and what you're doing, and that He'll remind you that He sees value in your gifts and in what you're accomplishing, even if others miss it sometimes. Secondly, remember this: solitude's not a bad thing. Obscurity's not bad. It's not a curse. We should make the most of it. There are things of value in seasons of solitude and obscurity. And remember always, God is not looking for perfect people.